We have the technology. We will confuse you. Right. Right. Artists work to record medicine.
Silence!
Art has worked to record medicine for all history, and before the advent of photography, it was the traditional graphic arts, drawing, painting, pastels and prints, along with casting and wax sculpture. This is a wax Venus, or anatomical Venus, that recorded the human body for medical use. This is from Andrea Vesalius's The Human Body, or De Humani Corpus Fabrica, from 1543. It's a workshop of Titian, and so you can see the arts were used for anatomical purposes. By 1914, there was, of course, X-ray photography to help in this process, but the traditional arts and artists were still utilised by surgeons who were dealing with the bloodied byproduct of industrial war. I'm only going to talk of one surgeon, two artists, two wars, and a 23-year-old pilot. In 1914, New Zealand-born Harold Gillies was a 32-year-old Harley Street ENT surgeon, famous amateur golfer, though he is on a cigarette card, an excellent violinist and reasonable pianist. Sent to visit hospitals on the front, he quickly realised that the technology of the new war was going to cause cause complicated problems for surgeons such as himself, who dealt with the head and with the soft tissues of the face. With the rank of major, he travelled to all the major British French hospitals, keenly observing their practice. This is a French soldier, noting what worked and what did not. At the time, while the French surgeons were considered the most advanced in facial surgery, and the Germans in general surgery, they did not care for the aesthetic result. So this chap is considered both finished and functional, and he was sent back to the front. They also did not coordinate their efforts, individual surgeons guarding their techniques and secrets from each other, and importantly, they did not value dentists who undertook to fix broken teeth and jaws. Could not work alone, they had to work supervised in their theatres. It was in this role, as a supervisor to the Franco-American dental surgeon Auguste Fernandier, a man with a mobile dental surgery in his white 1913 Silver Ghost, that Gillies learned how important to fixing a face dentists could be. Returning to the UK, Gillies decided to create a facial hospital of all the talents, and not just a surgical one. He also realised that in order to develop and teach surgical techniques, as there were really far too few specialist surgeons available, and many would have to be taught and trained on the job, it was necessary to clearly and completely document each case. Gillies assembled a group of photographers, artists and sculptors to help him do this. He even took drawing classes himself. He was rubbish. So, Gillies' patients were photographed from all angles, and during their treatment, as you can see, this is a facial splint, and the original wound, and gradually having operations. You see wound contracture here, and sometimes they had to keep overdoing operations because of infection and unexpected results. They were also painted in colour. I want you to have a good look at this. This is most likely by Darrell Lindsay, who was an artist who worked with our feature artist, and this was his type of recording of. This is a pedicule, and that was how he recorded the faces he saw. They were painted in colour, and plaster casts were taken of their face to map in 3D the craters and misplaced bones. They were also X-rayed, which was rare and unusual. These images were then used by Gillies and other surgeons in conference to work out what was needed to be done surgically. The surgical multidisciplinary conference that we take for granted was a new idea, and opposite to what Gillies had observed in France. Surgeons commented on each other's cases, and healthy competition regarding the development of techniques and quality of result, which included function, key thing, function, was encouraged. Surgeons would also work literally in concert. 2 operations happening in the same theatre at the same time, with surgeons consulting each other on each other's patients on the operating table. Gillies began working in extant hospitals in London and Aldershot before the volume of patients made it clear that a new specialist facility was needed. The site was found in the grounds of Frognall House, an estate in Sidcup in 1917. A whole new hospital was built with funds from both the government, but more from private investors, including Queen Mary, who gave it £4,000, and after whom a hospital was named. There, all the facilities for rebuilding of faces and the rehabilitation and education of patients were built. Operating theatres, x-ray rooms, an appliance room for the making of prosthetics, and these prosthetics are in the Imperial War Museum, and dental surgery workshop. There was also a cinema, theatre and education rooms. Here patients could stay for the years it would take to complete their treatments. Many of them stayed on as trustees and workers because they couldn't face going into the outside world. The first operation undertaken by Gillies with each patient was usually the same for everyone, to undo what the doctors at the front had done. Terrified for patients bleeding to death, most of the surgeons sewed facial wounds closed. So if we go back to this one, see here, it's just been sewn closed. Yeah. Right? Just sewn closed. Fix it. Whatever type of wound it was, they stitched the edges together like a torn sack. This caused two problems: scar contracture and loss of facial function, so they couldn't move, and infection. By prematurely sewing the wound flaps closed, surgeons frequently sewed infection into the face. In addition to the dirt of the battlefield, the human mouth is a mass of germs, and many of the soldiers suffered from poor oral hygiene. The broken teeth, which were literally floating around in their mouths, made their mouths a festering hellhole for a surgeon. By the time Gillies got hold of them, he was fighting not only poor surgical decisions, but infection-filled pus. Gillies would open all the scars, so he'd just open out what was already there. Let the face fall into its natural parts, and then let any infection drain. He would work from there with other surgeons and dentists to rebuild what he could. So you see this outside splint. That would be the work of a mixture of dental surgeons and also the appliance officers to come up with something to help support his nose while his upper jaw was being rebuilt. Gillies used bone grafts from ribs. He used skin from all over the body. He just used everything. I mean, it was quite advanced. I was quite surprised at how advanced he was to get to the stage where someone's face could function. He would use plaster casts. So this is a guy called Tom Kelsey, and these are his plaster casts he took. See the photograph of the person in the background? Plaster casts of his patients. Here he is. He was either a New Zealander or an Australian, and this is from their archive. Drawings, photographs to map out the potential surgeries, and even do mock operations using fabric attached to the casts to mimic skin. Rubber dentures and pallets were made, facial splints built and installed, and waltzing pedicles, tubes of skin, to transfer skin from all over the body to the face. So these are the plaster casts of a patient. You can see they've had drawings put on them, and then this pedicule, which is a curled tube of skin, has been moved from his forehead down to his nose to give skin coverage to the nose. Pedicule was a brilliant invention. It allowed you to transfer skin with a safe blood supply, and also because the skin was closed in a flap, so sewn over, you didn't get infection inside. It was not Gillies' invention, though people think it is. It was more than likely came from India via Russia, but what he learnt to do was move it in a waltzing motion from one point to another across the body to the right place. So sometimes people literally had their arse on their face. So this is from Gillies' book, and it shows you his plaster cast, a drawing most likely from our feature artist, Henry Tonks, and then the actual pedicule and result. So you can see the stages. And that's what's left of the flap that was taken from his forehead. When he began to put his team together, Gillies was looking for a man who could document his operations. So he was terrible at drawing faces, even after taking those classes. He was directed to a gaunt figure in uniform behind a desk. Henry Tonks. When war broke out, Henry Tonks was 53 and a professor at the Slade School of Arts in London, yet he went to the front as a surgeon. Tonks had qualified as a surgeon in Birmingham and London before undertaking evening drawing classes which led him astray. This is one of his paintings. It's called Rustic Pageantry, and it's from about 1908. So, yeah. When he got to France, he realised his surgical skills were not going to be of no use at all. The injuries he saw were beyond his ability. So he moved to the casualty clearing stations, taught wound irrigation and cleaning to orderlies, nurses, and anyone who needed to know. And keeping sepsis at bay was key. Indeed, it was the ability to keep patients free from infection that enabled most to survive to the point where they needed the intervention of the plastic surgeons. When Gillies found him, Tonks had a desk job, but he was, of course, the perfect man for Gillies' Pizzicut project. Trained as a surgeon, but with brilliant skills as a draftsman, Tonks could understand and rapidly record what he saw on the operating table, and this he did, creating pen diagrams of operations in situ and neatly annotating them. This is Private Charles Deeks. This is from his file, and you can see that he labels the flaps and the edges and everything that gets sewn together, just like a map or just like an airfix kit, but a surgery airfix kit. And Charles Deeks is used always when people look into this type of work as an example. He's always there, and you'll see in a moment why. Working with Gillies gave Tonks another opportunity, the chance to record faces he would never see again. No one had ever seen faces like this that ever survived. Tonks was a good artist, a skilled one, and he was in his element. He was asked to draw the patients before and after their surgeries. So this is Charles Deeks when he came in, photograph. Not good. So this is him drawn by Tonks before his surgery. Please note the way that Tonks can describe a bulging lip with drool, and also can tell you that how displaced the chin is by putting in the beard. So you can see what's actually happened to his face. So though you've got this photograph which tells you the colour and the shine tells you actually what's going on in terms of bits of face and wound. He was asked to draw patients before and after their surgeries. Though they had been photographed, Tonks' pastel works gave the doctors vital information about the wounds and their healing that a black and white photograph could not. So that's Deeks after his surgery by Tonks. And notice it's a much lighter treatment because he's got less, he doesn't have to give as much information about what is going on in this shiny mass as there's the tongue. It's all gone, so it's just showing how it's been fixed. And this is him when he'd been discharged. So that's a pretty good job, I think.
Yeah. Wow.
Pastel was used because it's clean, simple, no need for jars of turps or brushes. Fast, dry, portable, and had a wide range of colours. And because Tonks' skill allowed him to use it to describe the great variety of surfaces he would see. Historically, pastels were considered inferior to paint as an art medium, needing less skill, though it was always popular as a portrait medium, particularly in the 18th century. This is Tonks again. Tonks' drawings are not large. They're just slightly over A4. He would not have needed a vast drawing board or easel to deal with the ordeal of intimidating equipment when facing the injured men. He was also in uniform, which gave him the sitting situation of formality and a set of rules that helped the most rare happening. So he's doing this portrait as a military man, stopped embarrassment via protocol. So these images are all Royal College of Surgeons, and I'm not giving individual names because I'm only really using them as examples of art. I'm being cruel and horrible, but to me they're not people, they're just pictures. I'm not going to lie. Tonks' pastels are small. He usually starts with white paper and tints the ground around if necessary. A white ground allows him to keep the colour bright and true, necessary to an image that is also a medical record. His images are brisk, the subjects are still, and look caught in the headlights of his gaze, even if their eyes are averted. The audience shares in their discomfort at being looked at, and we feel we are staring, but only because the rarity of the subject, but also the handling of the lines near the eyes, if eyes or eye are healthy, quiver. I think they've always got slightly juddering eyes. Tonks' handling of pastel, though seemingly loose, is acute. His lines are so exact in their movement that we can follow his gaze and share the points of interest with him, not only as a surgeon recording a medical case, but as an artist. Tonks was interested in representing the volume of healing scars and misplaced facial skin. This isn't what I was quite confused by this. This is his nose. His face has been destroyed and his nose has been sewn to his cheek. They actually managed to pull his face out using a splint, but of course they couldn't replace his eyes. Misplaced facial skin, its sheen and change in colour. He was particularly good at rendering the slimy granulation of the human tongue in tension and the tilt of the head when it's contracted. So this is Private Williams. He was from Nigeria, and he is quite an interesting representation because, apart from the fact he's the only black soldier that I've found in both Tonks and Kennington, in this, Tonks is definitely referencing a previous artwork. He references Rubens and Baroque paintings of magi and black servants, and it's the only one where you can see a definite reference. Because everything else is so strange and otherworldly, there is no other reference. No other artist has done this as a main artwork. So you can see his wound is contracted and turned his head to the side because he's got no jaw. They built on the jaw. Tonks' bones, this is bone, are green-grey. Any bony formations seen against the flesh are this odd colour. It may be that Tonks was using a limited palette or wanted the bone to stand out clearly against the flesh. Or it could be that these damaged and sometimes incomprehensible fragments of skull really were that colour. The pastels Tonks used were heavy in pigments, light in binder, and his paper had only a light texture. His colour can be dense and velvety, so in this it's all dense and heavily worked and beautiful colours. Or lightly applied and follow the grain of the paper and allow it to show through. Tonks' works not only describe the colour of the wounds, vital to knowing how healthy or not the tissues were, but also their texture, the constriction of scars, the rippled edge of torn cheeks, tongues in the wrong place, the depth and gloom of nasal cavities, shiny bloom of swelling, the grey-green of mandible and teeth that have been brutally displaced. Many of the photos, it's very difficult to actually understand what you are seeing in terms of skin and bone. When used beside Tonks' pastels, it becomes clear. These works were also copied, literally almost like a photocopy, they were photographed, drawn over by the surgeons, using them to map future flaps and sutures. Beyond being an aid to surgeons, Tonks enjoyed these works. He wrote of them, "It is a chamber of horrors, but I am quite content to draw them as it is excellent practice." A young fellow with rather a classical face was exactly like a living damaged Greek head, as his nose had been cut clean off. Another I have just finished, with an enormous hole in his cheek through which you can see the tongue working. Rather reminds me of Philip IV, as obstruction to the lymphatics has made his face very blobby. That's this guy. This is a Private H. Palmer. So this chap reminded him of a Velasquez. He also understood how sensational these images were and could be. After the war, when a museum, like the museums you see in continental cathedrals, was set up in the hospital, partly to create funds, in Sidcup, Tonks would not allow these works to be displayed. He did not want people to gawp and shudder at them, and thereby their unlucky subjects. Of course, he had stared and recorded and had the rare chance to do so, but he did not want these works to become attractions. Indeed, they were hidden away in the body of the Sidcup collection in the Royal College of Surgeons, accessed by students and professionals only, if they knew about them. They were some of the only works that survived a bomb in 1941 that hit the Royal College of Surgeons, took away all the plaster casts, and the artwork connected with Sidcup. Most of the artwork that we now have connected with this is actually in Australia or Canada, because Sidcup brought together Commonwealth surgeons and groups, and they took their people and their images with them. The Tonks pastels survived in neglected isolation until the 1990s, when historians sniffed them out, put them on television. They've since been displayed in several exhibitions, and in 2014 a book was published about them. I just want to show you this one. This is one of my favourites. This is Walter Ashworth. I used his image to promote the talk, but this is him before with a bowl to collect his drool. This is the Tonks drawing of his surgery. See how rapid the lines are, but the surgical drawing overlaid is actually very accurate. And then this is him after. And he's another one that's always used, but partly I think because he looked quite cheerful. He looks quite well afterwards. In fact, I think it's quite interesting that Tonks uses this greeny grey colour, which I think he would have looked greeny grey, unshaven and quite, well, smashed. And then when he redraws him, he gives him this pinkness and brightness and light and brings him forward. But I'm more likely projecting on that. After the war, Tonks went back to the Slade, tutoring future luminaries such as Stanley Spencer, retaining his reputation for strict discipline and damning remark on draftsmanship. And he died well regarded, but quickly forgotten in 1937, his unique record of pain, suffering and beauty lurking in the dark. By the time World War II came along, the Sidcup system of recording was gone, though some of the hospital remained, but its lessons had been learned and streamlined. Cameras were small enough to come into the operating theatre, and medical staff were trained in medical illustration. People like Tonks, artists first who could understand the broken face, were not needed. Eric Henri Kennington was 26 in 1914 when he attempted to join up, but was rejected for unspecified reasons. He was an established artist known for his images of street life. This is known as the Costermongers from 1912. He attempted to join up again, and as a private with the 13th Battalion London Regiment, the Kensingtons, was sent to France. Shortly after, he had an accident with a gun and shot the second toe of his right foot off. Became sick with infection and stuck in hospital for months, leaving the army in 1915 with an honourable discharge. And I'm not just talking about his toe. In 1916, he was back at the front line, and this time as a war artist, sharing space with the more famous John Singer Sargent. Unlike fellow artist William Orpen, Kennington went to the front without the protection of a commission or a place to stay far from the fighting. While there, he produced 170 drawings of soldiers in 7.5 months, which eventually became prints, and a large reverse glass painting now in the Imperial War Museum. Reverse glass painting is the sign of mental instability in an artist, because you paint the glass, the first surface of the glass first, and work backwards. And he wrote that in drawing this, which is, and I do have to look it up, it's the Kensingtons in one of their situations, and he is a chap in balaclava, considering he was only with them for a couple of months, he obviously felt they'd done something. He said he walking around back and front doing this painting than he had when he was actually on the front, because you have to go back and forth. It's quite astonishing. I've not seen it because I haven't been able to, but it sounds lunatic. Which is good. In 1920, he met T.E. Lawrence. This is his drawing of T.E. Lawrence. This is his style at the time. It's sparse, his drawing style in pastels. It's charcoal, high heavy charcoal, and white chalk or peach chalk on this grey background. This was more than like green paper originally, but it's faded. And he was entranced by him and volunteered to illustrate his travels. Lawrence, while he liked Kennington, did not exactly encourage him, telling him he would be welcome if he provided his own funds of £600, which is the equivalent of £24,000 today. Most likely expecting, perhaps hoping, this would be impossible. Kennington raised the money, sailed to the Middle East in 1921, and Kennington's work with Lawrence was covered in a previous talk here in 2008 by Dr. Jonathan Black, who is the Kennington man. So I'll not cover it in background. I'll then say the two men became close, and Kennington developed his pastel portrait style greatly during this time. So this is when he started, and then he moved on to doing these full colour pictures. And this is Muta Beni Hassan. This is one of the illustrations used in Seven Pillars of Wisdom. his work illustrated the seven pillars of wisdom. He was greatly affected by Lawrence's death in 1935 and created a memorial bust to him that was placed in St Paul's Cathedral. Having begun sculpting memorials in the 20s, at his own expense, over 3 years, he created the full-length effigy of Lawrence that is found in St Martin's Church, Wareham. So he did it, he wasn't asked to, he just did it. Lawrence wrote that Kennington was the only man who had seemed to represent his top moment in art. He left personal items to him. During the 30s, beyond creating memorials to Lawrence, Kennington continued his sculpture, memorials and some society portraits. In 1938, believing another war was close, he founded a camouflage group attached to the Air Raid Precaution Department within the Home Office, believing that the art of camouflage would be much needed in any future war. When World War II broke out, Kennington was sent back into action as a very specific war artist, drawing portraits of top military men and heroes. So this is Admiral of the Fleet Sir Alfred W. Pounds. This is one of his first World War II commissions from the the War Art Commission in the Ministry of Information. He drew over 150 pastel portraits between 1940 and 1943. Kenneth Clark, then director of the National Gallery and advisor to the War Artists Committee, wrote that Kennington was chosen not only for his merit as an artist, but because his style lent itself to reproduction in the form of picture postcards, damning with faint praise. Now, I'm going to show you some portraits from Kennington's time as a war artist. They are all either in the Imperial War Museum, the National Maritime Museum, or the RAF Museum. Again, to me, they are portraits, not really people. I'm a naughty, bad person. And so I'm not going to name them unless for particular reasons. So this one is in the National Maritime Museum, and I got to see it. And it's much more stunning in real life. It's quite an astonishing picture. Pastel was again used because it was clean, dry, easy to transport, discreet, easy to obtain, didn't take up much space, and was also not intimidating to the sitter. Kennington could sit with a drawing board in his knee and get on with it. He'd honed his style and technique over decades. He had an average sitting of 1 to 3 hours. He was paid 25 guineas at work, and he travelled across the country. After drawing some top military brass, Kennington was given naval subjects to draw, including men who had taken part in the Battle of the River Plate. Kennington commented that with naval subjects, so this is one, another, the problem was that when they were asked to stay still, they did, not even blinking. And there's a famous one of a guy called Stoker Martin, which I could not get a reproduction of, which is in the National Maritime Museum, and he's just sitting there like someone has turned him to stone. You are Medusa. Kennington's works are bigger than Tonks's works. They are about 80 by 60 centimetres at least, usually drawn larger than life. The classic monumental heroic. Kennington uses most frequently a very limited palette, sometimes only 4 colours. So in this work, he uses, believe it or not, he's got the black at the background, he's got white, blue, cream and burgundy. And if you look in the shadows, which you can't see in this reproduction, he just uses burgundy and cream to give the skin tone. And he uses the dark ground to give shadow. So it's us as the viewer that's doing all the work. Our brain puts all the things together. But you can see he's lit from the front. He looks like a sculpture. And then he's got this magical glowing light behind his ear. In reality, that's one of the best drawn ears you can see, but you can't see it because the National Maritime Museum have photographed it not optimally. Also, one of their Kenningtons has got mould. Anyway, yes, I went to see it. It's mouldy. So his treatment of the pastel is opposite to Tonks. Tonks is agitative. He takes a white background and adds colour. Kennington is reductive, more like a sculptor, which he was, uses a dark ground and adds highlights of colour. This is an RAF portrait. He's the epitome of like the RAF chap, isn't he? He's got a gigantic chin as well. But this, in the other pictures, increasingly in the RAF images, he begins to add more colour. So he starts off with these limited, using the paper for the shadow and the colour of the face, a very limited mark making, suggestive not making use in his actual hand movements to describe what you're seeing, the different textures of the clothing, the moustache, hair. It's all down to his skill, his hand-eye coordination. This is an amazing one. So he begins to add more colour, blocking out the background and paper colour. He adds details of clothing, accessories, and setting, making the images more interesting for the public viewer who would go to see them, displayed at the National Gallery. So the National Gallery was empty, they put on exhibitions. In place of Titian's and Gainsborough that were in storage, they became more illustrative and were turned into the postcards that Clark had predicted. Kennington was always aware of his works being exhibited and reproduced in books. He wrote books Tanks and Tank Folk, drawing the RAF, published them himself, made money. He pushed the ministry for the latter, to have them on display, to have known of his works, and to publish them. As said, some were turned into postcards, while others were lost in transit to exhibitions to the Allied and Commonwealth countries. So you can see this is another RAF one that's getting more colour, more description, less focus on the face, there's more going on, it's getting more busy, more poster-like, and more just like an illustration. They were sent to exhibitions in Allied and Commonwealth countries, also Russia. Kennington drew Canadian, Polish and other Allied pilots, even creating a homage to the Polish struggle. He was not only very patriotic and enthused by heroism, he was also very supportive of the Allies and represented them favourably. So this is, I think he's Norwegian. You can tell me the flags. So this is just like a sort of cinema poster image, but it uses the ground and his highlights to show the hand. You can imagine the rest of the hand, but it is very much like a poster image of, you know, the young hero, this cravat, you know, the Brooklyn Boys. Again, it grows more colour, telling you more about the background, etc., etc. And this is like the ultimate one for just completely drawing everything and filling in the whole page. This was a Polish hero. I cannot pronounce his name, so I'm afraid I've left him. But again, he's in the RAF museum, I believe. However, so far I've not found any non-white African servicemen or Indian servicemen in his images, unlike the Nigerian Private Williams with half a jaw recorded by Tonks. And I found no other guinea pigs. Those burned and maimed servicemen treated by Archibald Mackinder at East Grinstead. The follow-up to Gillies Sidcup, apart from the following. Meet Richard Hope Hillary. This is a photograph that marked his gaining his wings. An Oxford Blue in rowing, Hillary was born in 1919 in New Zealand and sent to England as a child for his education. He had spent the summer before the war broke out travelling through Europe rowing. He knew he wanted to be a journalist, perhaps in the colonies, when he graduated. Once he had his wings in 1940, and this is him in a German dinghy, where he was being shot at by one of his friends. Hence, he's looking down to his person to make sure it's all right. This was the only time he ever wore his actual kit, was when he was not flying. He eventually joined 603 Squadron, where he had 5 confirmed kills and 7 days flying before he was shot down and crashed into the sea. Hillary, like many young pilots, did not wear his gloves and goggles when flying, and on that day he had just had a new hood fitted to his Spitfire. The hood jammed, but he did get out, and he did get his chute open. This is from his book, The Lost Enemy. Then for the first time I noticed how burnt my hands were, down to the wrist. The skin was dead white and hung in shreds. By closing one eye I could see my lips, jutting out like motor tyres. In 1942, when Hillary becomes of interest to us, he has had new eyelids, a new top lip, and eyebrows made from the hair on the sides of his head. These have been arranged on his face by the famous plastic surgeon and cousin of Gillies, Archibald Mackinder, Queen Victoria East Grinstead, home of the Guinea Pig Club. And this is a very blurry guinea pig from the Imperial War Museum. He can write with a pencil. He's travelled to America to talk to the workers. He's been told he has a face for radio. He's written a book and had an affair with Merle Oberon.
Wow. Oh, wow.
The book, known as Falling Through Space in the US, was published by Macmillan, and this is the image of Hillary they used to promote it. It's heavily edited, particularly across his cheeks here and his lip. So that was his promotional picture for Falling Through Space. Later, the book is published in the UK as The Last Enemy and becomes a great hit. All this time, Hillary has been fighting to get back to flying. When not having operations on his face, he's having operations on his hands. When Eric Kennington meets Hillary, he looks something like this. So that's his face, new lip, new eyelids, new eyebrows. That's from below. And these are his hands. Hillary's wounds, as you can see, are recorded by camera, but his operations were recorded by drawings. Drawings I can show you, but I can't have them recorded. So you tell me when the little sign is up, Clayton. By late 1942, Hillary desperately wanted to be able to fly, and he knew the operations would continue. Still having trouble with watery eyes with his hands. How the Kennington portrait of Hillary came about is unclear. It is known that Eric Linklater recommended Kennington to Hillary, but why Hillary wanted a formal old-fashioned pastel portrait, which you'll see in a moment, is not documented. But it was clear he wanted to give it to his girlfriend, Mary Booker, a divorcee some years older than him, and a friend of Merle-Oberon. Actually, Merle-Oberon had recommended Mary Booker to Hillary. But considering sitting to an artist might be grueling at the best of times, sitting to one when you have facial burns, scarring, and are recovering from surgery, it's a peculiar choice. Sitting for photos and portraits is now recognised as a form of helpful therapy for some people with facial injury. I used to work for a charity that organised this. But in the 1940s, as we saw from the Macmillan photograph, the close recording of damaged face was not the fashion. It was not a form of rehabilitation used by Mackindoe at East Grinstead. So this is Kennington's portrait of Hillary in the National Portrait Gallery. It was also the time that Hillary was struggling. He writes constantly of struggling with the decision. He was nagging everyone to pass his medical board fit to fly. Perhaps having a portrait drawing was about capturing a moment of success as an author, and before he knew he would be allowed to fly, etc. I think the choice of Kennington is quite clear. He was a famous portrait artist by now, what with the shows at the National Gallery and the publishing of books such as Drawing the RAF and Tank Folk. He was known to be the artist of the RAF, to which Hillary wanted to return. Being drawn, though as a private commission by Kennington in his uniform, Hillary was placing himself among his RAF contemporaries again. Indeed, this image could easily slip in with the other 120 pictures. On the 1st to the 3rd of October 1942, Hillary travelled to Kennington's house in the south of Oxfordshire and sat for him in a room full of Lawrence memorabilia. Kennington gave him a rare copy of Lawrence's The Mint, his account of his return to the services as a member of the RAF. This book was not meant to be published until long after Lawrence's death, and Kennington was one of the few people to have a rare, limited edition of the text. Hillary wrote to Mary that he had quite lost my heart to Kennington. He has the most extraordinary personal magnetism of anyone I have ever met. A great man, I think. On sitting, he wrote, I felt such a wonderful surge of peace and potential creation as I've never felt before. Kennington has uncanny second vision. You can see it in his portraits. Kennington wrote to him, you sit there and you hand over your mind for me to play with, and yet you have the power, not I. It's a rare chance to read about a sitting from both sides of the easel. When I first saw this portrait in a book in 1993, I knew there was something wrong with the face, the creasing, crinkle of the brow, but I did not read the blurb about the burning. Indeed, I just thought it was the artist's style. I didn't see another Kennington, and I didn't know that it was not usual, that he could draw accurately, and the oddness of the face was actually real. In this portrait, Kennington uses his limited palette to play down the patchwork patchwork nature of Hillary's face. It was noted that his grafted eyelids were paler than the surrounding skin, as was his top lip, having been grafted from parts of the body that were not frequently tanned or exposed to the weather, even as a rower. The irregularities of Hillary's brows and eyes are turned into a look of intense concentration. The strong frontal lighting bleaches away the ruts from his burns. It's only the peculiar pinched nature of the interior corner Yeah. And the highlighted arc of unusual anatomy at the external edge of his left eye, and the contrary anatomy of his nose, wide pale bridge, it's kind of flat, and pinched length and slight tip, described by tone and colour that tell us there is something wrong. The viewer would think that some of it is lighting, but indeed it was colour. The bridge of Hilary's nose was augmented in the US, and it was indeed paler than the rest of his nose. The viewer questions the veracity of the portrait, the artist's ability, like I did, because the shadow of the nose makes no sense. But indeed it was so pinched, as were the eyes. The lips are shown with a bow on the upper lip. It's very important, he loved the bow in his upper lip. Which had been there before the war and that many had said disappeared with surgery, but we know from the photographs we saw is actually present. Kennington wrangles with the problem of Hilary by lighting him strongly, colouring him in a way, in a limited way, and letting the implied shadow of his jawline here do the rest. It leaves a great deal to the viewer to fill in. Uses the same strong light that illumines Hilary, the hero, to light his RAF wings, as it did in the official RAF portraits. Hilary was very pleased with the work. "I've got a face," he wrote, and he gave it to Mary. A month later, Hilary was finally found fit to fly, against the repeated warnings of Mackintosh, who wrote that not only was Hilary physically unfit, but also perhaps mentally strained. He was posted to train to be a night fighter pilot. On January the 7th, 1943, Hilary and his navigator were killed when the Blenheim Hilary was piloting crashed into a hillside during the nighttime training exercise. When Hilary died, he left the portrait to Mary Booker and mentioned Kennington in his will as the only complete man I know. Hilary's father wanted Kennington to create 2 copies of this portrait, for Shrewsbury School and one for Trinity College, Oxford. Kennington created 1 copy, which I've seen, and this is a very good reproduction of it. It's very odd. Now displayed at Trinity, but wrote to Michael Hilary that he could not make a second copy. It is hinted that Kennington had a small breakdown at this time. I believe he drew no more RAF portraits. I've not found them, but I am researching. There are differences between the Trinity portrait and the NPG original. So if you have a look. In the colour, stronger colour, denser use of pastels, less subtlety. It's more like an edited, cleaned up version. The light is harsher and more boring, to be quite frank. Got better hair. Yeah, I mean, lovely thick mane, using the Head and Shoulders. But yeah, it's not as subtle and by miles, really not. Colours in the copy are more intense, less subtle, particularly the green behind the head, green light behind Hilary's head, which is quite strong green in real life. The mark making on the face is less delicate and the pastel more thickly applied. Hilary's original image was lent by Mary Booker to his family for the duration of his parents' life. As they outlived her, it was they who decided to give the image to the National Portrait Gallery. After his death, Michael Hilary, Richard's father, his wife, arranged for the pastel to go to the NPG. She was not Hilary's mother, she was his second wife, in 1977. At the time, the gallery accepted the piece, not because of the fame of the artist or the sitter, but because they had no examples of portraits of World War II pilots, and no example of portraits of Mackintosh's patients. I've actually seen the letter where they say, we're going to accept this because we don't have anything else like it. They didn't gain one of Mackintosh until 1987. Portrait languished on top of a cupboard. I've actually seen the record of it staying on top of a cupboard, periodically being condition checked for a decade when it finally went on display. Renewed interest in Mackintosh and the Guinea Pigs in the 90s, and Sebastian Falk's telling of Hilary's life in The Fatal Englishman, 100th anniversary of the RAF and the anniversaries of the Battle of Britain, and Letters of the Last Enemy, his book, being republished. Sometimes with Kennington portrait on the front, but never with the photos from East Grinstead. By the beginning of World War II, Henry Tonks, famous in his lifetime and the eminent degrees to British art of the 20s and 40s, was dead. Now, if you research him, it's the long hidden images of damaged servicemen that spring up. While his personal work is little known. Tonks' pastels are held by the Royal College of Surgeons in London, in Lincoln's Inn, whose archive has reopened after 2 years this week, which means I might actually get to see them. So Harold Gillies continued working on faces at Sidcup into the mid-20s, and the hospital wound down. I just want to Go on. So this is the whole collection of the Gillies at the Royal College. There are about 80 of them. And this is how they present them on their website. He returned to private practice, frequently treating old soldiers, as his Gillies, at a lower rate. Returned to the front line facial surgery in World War II, being one of the big four facial and neck surgeons, yet overshadowed by his cousin and student, Sir Archibald Mackindoe, and his guinea pigs at East Grinstead. East Grinstead was built on the shoulders of the giants of Sidcup, not only in terms of surgical techniques and results, but also in terms of rehab. After the war, Gillies performed the first successful female to male and male to female sex reassignment surgeries in 1946 and 1957 respectively, using his experiences of delicate surgery gained in both wars to make this procedure a success. Think of the pedicle. He died slightly poor in 1960. After the war, Eric Henri Kennington returned to sculpture, but he never developed further artistically. He created figurative monuments, illustrative portraits, and a Danish bacon medal. The art world moved beyond him. I can't find it. Moved beyond him and is still best known for his work with Lawrence, though our own Dr. Black has sought to rehabilitate him. And I believe his portrait should be considered more seriously, not as mere historical record, but as examples of pastel art. In the various archives I visited, I found no complete set of images of his World War II work and hardly any images out of 170 drawings from World War I. Richard Hillary's reputation shrank in the years after his death. There were so many martial memoirs coming out. Though his family created their own mini cult. Copies of the Kennington's portrait were destined for his old school in Oxford College, but the family set up funds for prizes in his name. Prizes for writing, which are still awarded in both institutions. In 2019, Trinity celebrated the centenary of Hillary's birth with an exhibition and a dinner. This year, the Hillary Prize for Creative Writing was won by Alexander Svich and Nicholas Valencia. The copy of the portrait hangs in the stairwell of their new building. There we go.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Absolutely fascinating talk. We've got time for a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bobby?
Yeah, just I didn't catch the name. Dr. Jonathan was the expert on.
Dr. Jonathan Black.
Black, thank you very much.
He's at
Kingston.
Yeah, he's at Kingston now.
Yeah.
He's known. I mean, you go into an archive and you say, "I want to look at Eric Henri Kennington." They're like, "Have you read Jonathan Black's book?" And this is here if anyone wants to look at it.
Excellent.
Yeah, Ian.
Very interesting subject, which I'm very squeamish about. But
Not anymore.
But what led you into sort of this subject, and that may I ask? If you don't mind.
I wanted to, when I was a teenager, I wanted to work as facial reconstruction on archaeological skulls,
Okay.
basically. I'm just interested in the face. I'm almost obsessive. I mean, I'm autistic and my obsession is faces.
Yeah, because the faces, when if they are damaged, it's a very difficult thing
Yeah.
to reconstruct,
Well, the thing is
but a
that
very important thing to reconstruct.
Gillies is quite extraordinary. He uses the pedicle. He thinks of things. They did bone grafts from ribs. Then
Yeah.
people think it's a modern thing. It's not. He put bone grafts in the nose. He used to put them under the skin of the forehead so they'd acclimatise and move it down. I mean, people were reconstructing noses because of syphilis in the 16th century. He used almost the same technique. There was only so many ways you could rebuild a nose. His great discovery is actually that if you move skin to a nose or a mouth, you have to line it. You have to double it up. Because you can't have a raw edge inside. And he also discovered that you never use a hairy part for the inside of a mouth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys. Very interesting.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, James?
Typically, I know each patient is very individual, but typically how long would this facial reconstruction take?
It depended on how much he had to undo and how much he had to rebuild and how much experimentation. So you get someone like Ashworth, who's our sort of star And actually, though his injuries looked absolutely appalling, he didn't have to have that much done. Usually what actually happened was they'd have 1 or 2 operations and go away and then come back and find that something wasn't working, or they had to wait for something to heal. So it took over years, but Sidcup wound down in the late 1920s. People were still coming back to have bits fixed. And the other thing was that people kept coming back to him into the 30s, you know, all the way down. And he didn't charge for that when they were coming back to him. Also, what he did was, with the ones that would need more surgery and particularly badly injured, he had them retrained. So they learned how to stuff dolls, they learned to do, they learned skills which meant they would interact with people. And they stayed at the hospital. And his chauffeur, his accountant, almost everyone who worked for him when he left there were patients. So sometimes, you know, there was years. You know, they were still coming.
Yeah.
Fresh injuries were still coming in 1919 because it took so long for them to get from France to him, eventually to the right person.
Yeah.
But one of his great, I didn't mention it because I've actually forgot. One of the things he did was when he was trying to set up a hospital and he was being poo-pooed because they said, who cares about what these people look like? He made these labels with his name on.
Yeah.
And he gave them to the ministry and said, put this label on people who have facial injuries and they will come to me. So it had his name on. And they were literally labelled like a package as they ended up on.
Wow.
One more question, please.
I know that these are basically portraits,
Yeah.
and I know that when members of the committee get their portraits done, they want to be flattered and,
Yeah.
and sort of, you know, have what they were provided by nature enhanced for the benefit of the viewer. But these are quite raw, it seems to me.
Well, they have to be.
Yeah.
They're accurate. They're not portraits. This is the thing. The parts of them are portraits. The bits that represent the bits that aren't damaged are portraits.
But look, well, I think my question is, which is the greater skill, to highlight the injuries in the right way, to educate, or to enhance a member of the committee to hide what nature gave them?
If you are drawing what is in front of you for a purpose, that is what you do to the best of your ability, and that's what Tonks did. He used his skills and his knowledge, and he also used his informed knowledge as a surgeon to capture what was necessary for the purpose of the drawings. In turning someone in photo editing someone with a paintbrush, you're not actually drawing what's there, you're drawing what you imagine. So really it just depends on how difficult it is for you as an artist to draw something that doesn't exist.
It's very difficult for an artist to capture the glorious committee's ethereal beauty.
You know full well that you glamour and dazzle us so much that really you just come out as a halo. We just keep drawing halos. Seraphim, you know, all these eyes and wings and the sound of terror and death.
I heard that nothing was ever painted because the artist was too busy genuflexing. We are not worthy, we are not worthy.
But it's mainly
The
because
paint
we
never
can't
did.
remember what happened, but we limp afterwards.
Anyway, thank you,
Yeah,
Sarah,
well done.
for that information.